Hello and welcome to episode 228 of Herpetological Highlights. My name's Tom Major. Co-hosting with me, as per usual, it's Dr. Ben Marshall.
Hey.
What's happening, Ben? And in this episode, we are going to be talking about boas and pythons. Yeah. We never get to talk about them. Hardly ever.
I don't know.
They're the best.
I feel like we've talked about them quite a lot for the episodes, actually. Probably not as much as...
Scarcely a day goes by where I don't talk about boas and pythons, to be fair.
I think vipers are probably the most talked about group of snakes throughout the podcast. I reckon so. Because I think they have a lot of things that are lending themselves to study, and they've got a lot of sort of weird morphology that people like poking at and seeing how it works. I reckon they're probably in the...
And they're easy to catch because they don't really run away.
That too.
Always a good thing for a study species if you can actually get your hands on it relatively easily. You're right. But I'm excited to talk about boas and pythons. We're going to be talking about heat-sensitive pits, obviously one of the coolest adaptations that snakes have. This ability to sort of...
Definitely one of the most iconic, right?
100%. Yeah. And it's, like thermoreceptivity has inspired some pretty cool... films and such, like, Predator, that kind of thing. So yeah, it looms large.
Right, exactly. It does capture the imagination because it's this extra sense, this extra sort of form of perception that feels very alien to us, despite...
Very alien.
Having ways of sort of conceptualizing it, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. So I'll introduce the paper, Biswas, Ghosh and Agashe, In Hot Pursuit, Exploring the Evolutionary Ecology of Labial Pits in Boas and Pythons, published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2025. So yeah, evolutionary innovation is what we're talking about. Heat-sensing pits in boas and pythons. And so to detect heat, animals are detecting infrared radiation, which is electromagnetic energy with wavelengths longer than visible light, but shorter than radio waves. So it's sort of like halfway to being able to see BBC Radio Breakfast. But these receptors allow animals to perceive and respond to shifts in thermal energy, so they can essentially see.
Well, it's gone all digital now, hasn't it, though?
It has gone all digital now, which is a shame. Is it a shame? I don't know. It works better. I love BBC Radio 6, so I like digital radio. But yeah.
It's progress, isn't it?
It's all progress. I also like that when you lose range, it just goes silent rather than static white noise.
You don't like the sort of creepy scenarios where you get two radio stations competing over each other and...
No, horrendous. So yeah, obviously we're talking about heat-seeking pits in boas and pythons. Vipers have it too, but there are other animals which possess thermoreceptors, including some butterflies, vampire bats, which have similar little things near their nostrils. They can see heat. They can find their nice warm-blooded prey. Mosquitoes also do this. And there's these things called pyrophilous beetles, which are attracted to heat sources, particularly forest fires, using infrared receptors. And these pyrophilous beetles, that just leaves fire-loving, they use heat detection to find areas where they can lay eggs. They lay their eggs in like burned or charred trees, so they find fresh forest fires.
Oh, so they're looking for that like residual heat left over from a fire, as opposed to, I need to be in the fire and these eggs need to sort of hatch forth like some sort of beetle phoenix.
That would be way cooler, but I think if you put any animal...
I mean, that would be awesome, but...
I think most animals, if you put them in direct fire, they just get burnt. I don't think there are many that can go through a full fire, but yeah. And in snakes, thermoreceptors are famously found on pit vipers like rattlesnakes, as well as almost all pythons and some boas. In pit vipers, they're called loreal pits. They're like this hole between the eye and the nostril, which you can see as like a little hole. Whereas boas and pythons have a line of slits, either along the top lip or the bottom lip. And they're
both.
Much more sensitive. Or both. Are there some with both? Yeah, maybe like white-lipped pythons have both, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't think it's super common to have both, but I do think there are a couple of examples, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, yeah, because some are above, some are below. It's hard to imagine, really, actually. But, yeah. Anyway, boas and pythons have got it.
Yep.
Vipers have got it. Vipers, it's much more sensitive, up to 4 times more sensitive, because of I think when you have that loreal pit arrangement, there's like more of the sensitive nerves on display. I'm not quite sure.
It's a density thing, right?
Yeah, it's a density of nerves thing. That's right. Which is...
They were mentioning in the paper too that it's got they've got a sort of lower threshold too. So they've got a sort of a bigger range of thermal sensitivity.
Yeah, it turns on
the vipers, that is.
Yeah. It turns on at more wide range of temperatures, right? Yeah. And so most researchers focus on pit vipers because they're so cool. But there are 104 species of boa and python too, and they range widely in size. So you've got little pythons like Antaresia, these little anthill pythons that only grow up to 70 centimeters. And then you've got the whopping 10-meter Malaopython reticulatus, the reticulated python. I noticed in this paper, Ben, that they said from 70 centimeter Antaresia to the 32-foot Malaopython reticulatus. 32 foot in a Royal Society journal? How did that one slip through, mate? It's a goddamn disgrace. No, not at all. I just thought it was funny that they switched sense there.
In the same sentence, yeah. That's bold.
Yeah, I know, yeah. It's an outrage. Yeah, it's so funny. It's funny that slipped through. But yeah, very wide range of habitat preferences too. So some are arboreal, living in the trees. Some are terrestrial. Some are semi-aquatic. They're found in deserts, scrublands, tropical forests. So we have this huge diversity of species.
And fossorial.
Yeah, those disgusting little fossorial ones.
Yeah. Their funny stubby faces and their eyes on the top of their heads.
Yeah. But the authors wanted to discover more about the evolution and use of these pits. Are there specific habitats, for example, where pits are more useful? How do they influence the habitat preference of the animals? Do they influence their evolution? Can it affect the hunting strategy that the animal uses? Are snakes with heat-sensing pits more likely to be, let's say, ambush predators, perhaps, waiting for something warm to shuffle by? And they also wanted to know if this ecological innovation allowed boas and pythons to diversify into more species because of this cool.
I think that's it, isn't it? It's looking at the association of these pits to various sort of ecological characteristics or just other characteristics of the snakes, and you're hoping that some of those connections or associations are going to hint at mechanisms behind why one appeared or the other appeared, i.e. having pits, not having pits, or filling a particular sort of niche, or in this case of like having a particular diet or something like that. Because basically those associations are going to hint at purpose and function and the sort of benefits of having these pits kind of directly, and where they aren't worth having.
Precisely. So let's talk about evolution first, shall we? In terms of like gains and losses of pits throughout the evolutionary history of boas and pythons. Because I personally think this is really cool. So,
I mean, this is the fun sort of like convergent evolution thing, right? Where if you get sort of less sort of genetically related species that have very similar traits, but it's hinted that their sort of ancestral state didn't have them, and it's sort of these multiple, if you're getting multiple instances of a trait like heat pits appearing, it's a pretty good sign that either there's a lot of flexibility there and it's very easily gained, or you've got very potent selective pressures that are popping up in different contexts for different species, leading to something that from the outside appears to be the exact same solution to what you're assuming is the same problem, even if problems and solutions are a little bit sort of not the best way to think about it in evolutionary terms, but
yeah,
for the sake of language, it's an easy way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So in Python evolution of pits. So essentially, the common ancestor of all pythons had heat-sensing pits. So their python ancestor at the root of pythons was a heat-sensitive snake. And virtually all pythons have actually kept it. It's only been lost once, and that is by the ancestors of Aspidites, genus Aspidites. So their ancestors lost heat-sensitive pits. Aspidites is like black-headed pythons, Woma pythons. So really, in pythons, the story is quite straightforward. They always had pits. Most of them still got them, but not Aspidites. They've lost them. And I know that Womas and black-headed pythons, it surprises me really that they're the ones that have lost their pits. But I guess, I don't know. I think they eat a lot of reptiles, don't they? I don't know. I'm not quite sure.
In this, they're both classed as having predominantly ectothermic diets.
Yeah, right. So they're reptile eating, which I guess we'll get onto that more later. But yeah, boas.
We will. We'll go into the reasons behind. Yeah, that's right there. Both of them are classed as ectothermic in this analysis.
Right. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, because I seem to recall. Yeah, they like lizards and snakes, possibly snake on snake combat. But the story in boas is a bit more interesting. So there have been multiple times that heat pits have been gained. Pits evolved independently at least 4 times in boa lineages. So the ancestors of the genus Sanzinia, which are the Madagascan boas. I know, Ben, we might see Madagascan boas sometime soon, my friend. That'd be very cool. Corallus, tree boas, and Epicrates, rainbow boas, and also the Cuban boa, Chilobothrus angulifer. So 4 different groups of boas have independently evolved these heat pits, which is pretty incredible that they've kind of popped up these 4 times and managed to sort of evolve into the situation where they are useful as sort of prey detection or looking around the habitat and deciding. And then they were interested in the associations. Should we talk about the presence of pits and habitat stuff? The kind of associations there? Where do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think habitat's the big one, right? Habitat's the main sort of connection that they find in this paper more than anything else. It's the clearest, it's the most statistically sort of obvious. And, to put it simply, it's basically arboreality seems to be a key component of predicting whether a python or boa is going to have heat-sensitive pits or not. That being said, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're exclusively arboreal. It's the ones that have an arboreal aspect to their ecology. Because it's very hard to categorize something as tidily as it is strictly arboreal sort of thing. Because everything comes to the ground at some point. Maybe it falls out of a tree, but
yeah.
But it's arboreality as a common characteristic in their ecology and life.
Yeah, it seems to be a link which is difficult to ignore. If you're living in the trees, you seem to be much more likely to have heat-sensitive pits. Yeah. And like you say,
it's not a one-to-one. There are arboreal species that don't have heat-sensitive pits, but it is a pretty strong tendency.
Yeah, and you can see why that would make sense, because arboreal habitats are really really three-dimensional. Anything can go in any which way, particularly if you're hunting a bird. Come on, it's going all over the place. But yeah, and there's also some evidence that snakes think about where they position themselves, right? They know they have heat-sensitive pits, so they'll position themselves in thermally contrasting environments in order to best give themselves the best chance when something warm shuffles by. But yeah, so strong associations between arboreality and eating and pits. And also, the other thing was the diet, right? The endothermic warm-blooded animal diet.
Right, which tallies up with this idea of thermal gradient sort of thing. I think there's hints that basically the arboreal environment's going to have better thermal gradients to make the pits essentially more effective, right? If you imagine a sort of background of sky or leaves or something that doesn't hold temperature necessarily as well, stuff is going to pop out and therefore it's going to be more useful. And certainly, it was I'm just looking at they've got a wonderful phylogenetic diagram in figure 1 that sort of shows all the different traits that they were looking at and the pit presence and not. And it's pretty much all of the species that are classed as ectothermic diets specifically, i.e. not eating warm-blooded...
cold-blooded eaters.
Yeah. None of those have heat-sensitive pits. And all of the ones that do have heat-sensitive pits are endothermic diets or a mixed diet. So all of them have some component of their diet which is warm-blooded, which makes perfect sense, right? Because you're not going to see the same benefits if you're trying to detect, a lizard that is thermally conforming to its background and therefore doesn't stand out very much versus, a little mouse or something that's going to seem very warm in relation to its background, and therefore heat-sensitive pits are worthwhile. So it's a really sort of clean, obvious sense there. Yeah.
Yeah, but they also found, didn't they, that not only is it obviously most snakes which have pits are, not most, but many are arboreal, most eating warm-blooded prey. But didn't they also found that snakes were more likely to become arboreal if their ancestors had pits?
Yes. So this was something that their sophisticated phylogenetic analysis, right? That it gives you an idea of the sort of directionality of these multiple different traits. And they were certainly getting at that. I think it was both the diet and the arboreality had a tendency to sort of enable the pit stuff, right? As opposed to the other way around. So it was, how did they phrase it? They had a good way of tying it up.
While you look for that, I'm just going to mention.
Yeah, with pits, if you've got pits, you're likely to transition towards arboreal habitats and an endothermic-based diet, is what they say.
So it kind of works both ways. Not only is it beneficial, but it also pushes them towards that.
Yes. So the suggestion being sort of if you've got pits, I'm not entirely positive how they determined sort of what came first necessarily. I suppose when it came a big chunk of them with the ancestral state having heat pits, you've got heat pits, and therefore you're more likely to, you've already got the equipment, so to speak, to have an advantage in arboreal environment. So that's sort of suggesting that the pits are coming first, and therefore the sort of higher rates of arboreality are coming as a response to having this sort of solution, this tool that can be made use of, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, if you could see heat, you wouldn't really be able to ignore mice running around, would you? It'd be like...
Right, so it's looking for the easiest solution to your problem that is needing something to eat.
One thing I also want to mention is that they talk about the snakes using their heat pits not only for hunting, but also for like finding good thermal refuges. So like in an arboreal setting, little patches of sun, or like maybe a branch which has been in the sun but isn't in the sun now and it's warm, they can go and sit on that. Just sounds really cozy to be able to see that something's hot and then go and sit on it.
I think there's the extra bit, although the vast majority of these species are somewhat ambush hunting, so it's sort of harder to tell apart. I do think ambush hunting snakes additionally benefit from that, right? Because I mean, they cite it here, and I can't remember what the paper is, but I know we've covered it on the podcast previously. For vipers, there's evidence that they purposefully pick ambush sites that enhance that sort of thermal environment, right? That thermal contrast, that thermal gradient, so they can better discern their prey item against the background.
Yeah. I guess if you've got more color, you've got more different temperatures in the background, the prey will contrast with more potential things as it comes past.
Or if there's a temperature gradient sort of towards you, it's basically another piece of information to gauge distance, right?
Right. Yeah, it's all very clever. One last thing I wanted to touch on was that they looked to see like old fossil snakes, fossil boas or fossil boids, and they looking at the sort of primitive fossils which bear pits suggests that the first snakes that we know of, at least, that had pits were predominantly terrestrial and were generally very large compared to other like boas or whatever boids at the time. Whereas smaller fossilized boas lacked pit organs. So essentially these snakes started off really big with the pit organs, but then subsequently they've sort of potentially gotten smaller as they've been pushed into these arboreal niches and potentially warm-blooded prey as well.
Yeah.
With this kind of innovation of heat pits. So they started off as these big fat things, but generally now snakes with heat pits aren't so big.
Just to sort of jump off that they're sort of starting off that way necessarily. And their final question was about diversification rates and whether the sort of heat pits enabled some sort of radiation, or like, because you can imagine a sort of novel or key trait that suddenly opens up all these other possibilities, and then suddenly this group of animals gets into a new niche and explodes and fills in all the
like the
different
geckos
ways
in New Caledonia.
Yeah, but that doesn't seem to be the case with these heat pits. They don't find any sort of evidence that it massively boosted diversification rates, right? Like it's so. In that case, it seems like quite a okay, it was an ancestral state, but it seems quite nicely and tidily connected to these sort of ecological scenarios and life history traits of these snakes, that if you have these pits, you can live a certain sort of life. And it's so beneficial that it can re-evolve in other lineages repeatedly.
Yeah, but it's very seldom lost, which might, in fact, very, very seldom lost. Only lost in Asperities, right? So
yes, they did say that they had two competing.
Oh yeah, there was another one.
Loss gain things, and that were very equal in likelihood, and one did have a few more losses to it. So I think we can pretty much be confident that there have been multiple gains, like an interesting number of multiple gains, but potentially not just the one loss.
Mm. But there we go, boas and pythons, incredible diversity of heat pits, and it tends to mean that they're arboreal and eating warm-blooded prey, which kind of makes sense. They can see it best.
And ambush predators.
And ambushing, yeah. So should we move on to our species of the bye week?
We should, yeah.
It's an arboreal snake, how fitting. Nothing happens by accident here. So we got Albuquerque, Martins, Carvalho, Shepard, Santana, 2025, a new species of parrot snake, Leptophis, from the Brazilian Cerrado, published in PeerJ. So here we go. Brand new species of parrot snake in the genus Leptophis. These are quite cool snakes. Arboreal, very arboreal. They tend to be green on top with a sort of more tan.
They look very arboreal too.
Yeah, they just have big eyes. Like, they're your classic. They actually have really big eyes for a diurnal snake. But yeah, they're sort of moving around the treetops, trying to catch lizards and stuff. I guess the Asian equivalent of these is like, what are they called?
Dendrolaphis?
Dendrolaphis, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They basically look the same, don't they?
They're very well. This is what I sort of mean by them looking like a very arboreal snake, sort of slim, pointed. Yeah,
Yeah, they really are long, thin, yeah, pointy, very, very pointy. Well, actually, yeah, kind of a cute round nose, but yeah, big eyes. And this is a new species that's been described from Brazil. So what have they called it? They've called it Leptophis mystachinus.
Mm-hmm.
Mystachinus. What's the etymology for that, Ben? Do you know?
Having a mustache, basically.
Oh, yeah, it's from the Greek mystax, meaning upper lip or mustache.
Having a mustache-like, and it's got this sort of dark pigmentation, which gives the appearance of a mustache, as they so put it. And I mean, you can see it. This is beautiful sort of two-tone snake, green on top, pale on below, with this sort of dark stripe along its side. The other species it looks similar to, that dark stripe does not extend to the snout, I don't think. Whereas this one, it does, hence giving it that sort of mustachioed look, and therefore named after. I think, as diagnostic traits go, that's quite a nice one. As long as there hasn't been like scale rubbing or something like that to hide it.
Yeah, no. And this is a species found in like northern Brazil, in kind of, I guess it's sort of like a scrubby. There aren't any pictures, but it looks like it's sort of scrubby, a little bit foresty. Yeah, we don't really know too much about this species.
Inside the Cerrado, yeah.
I don't think we know much about their behavior. Presumably they're arboreal. Distribution's just known from 2 states. Yeah.
Yeah. Decent size too for arboreal. We're talking, what's that? Sort of 80 to 85 centimeters SVL, depending on whether a male or female. A little bit bigger than that. So pretty reasonable arboreal snake as they go.
Yeah. You ever seen a wild Leptophis?
No.
No, I haven't either. Didn't see one in Costa Rica. My brother saw one in Brazil recently.
I have seen Dendrolaphis, though.
Oh, yeah. I've seen lots of Dendrolaphis. Yeah, tons. Yeah, lots of different species. All right, cool. That's it. There we go. Brand new species, Leptophis mystachinus. No common name, so we'll call it the mustachioed parrot snake.
I like the mustachioed parrot snake. I concur.
I think they're missing a trick if that isn't what it's being called already. Cool. Have you got any other business this week, Ben?
I mean, I can do it. It's not sort of pressing business, but considering we're sort of... So, recently, just a paper documenting ritualistic male-male combat in northern king cobra in Thailand. These are a couple of, 2 instances of tracked individuals that... So, I suppose any sort of listener of podcast who has listened multiple episodes have probably heard previously, helped out with king cobra work in Thailand, radio tracking king cobras and working out where they go, what they do. So part of this paper is describing a couple of instances as observed via the tracking efforts there. Also, there's a description of a third instance elsewhere in Thailand, but it is just a nice breakdown of male-male combat in northern king cobras, which, it's been observed in other places. It's pretty widely known, but I think really the point of the note is to get it out and document it a little bit more formally. And I think anything when it comes to king cobra stuff now, document it, get it out there, formally published. Having them just be split up. Some of the best observations of king cobra combat don't necessarily come from the species in particular now, because they've all been split up, so you've got to take everything with a little bit more grain of salt, that it might not actually be relevant to the area that you're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's nothing that probably people aren't crazy familiar with regards to the sort of, it's very classic combat, one snake trying to push down the other snake and vice versa. I think there's some sort of fun discussion points about why it wasn't observed sort of more frequently throughout the tracking period, regarding maybe it only sort of occurs when, well, they're basically in the discussion saying that maybe it is only really likely to be spotted when males of similar size are going at it, because it lasts a little bit longer, sort of boosting that chances of finding it. And maybe when the size differences are quite dramatic, it's so quick, it's been missed. I kind of suspect that maybe if the size differences are so much between different males, maybe they don't even bother. Because, I don't know, I feel like a lot of different species have a decent way of weighing up whether a fight is worth it before engaging. Because, I mean, it takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of energy. Why waste it if you know you're going to lose, sort of thing?
Especially with cobras, like king cobras, because if there's two males and one's much bigger than the other, the threat doesn't end at being humiliated in a fight. They could eat you. Potentially,
right? Like it has been documented. Cannibalism does exist in king cobras and was observed at Scarra. So like it does happen. Doesn't seem to be crazy frequent, but it's also one of those things that's very hard to observe. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of this is mitigated by density of snakes in the area. I wouldn't be surprised if some of this is mitigated by some other sort of social or communication sort of aspect that would maybe diminish the need for combat. And yeah.
It's cool paper though. It's fun. It's got a nice figure. It shows, because they had both males tracked and the female tracked as well, right? All three snakes that are involved were tracked, is that right? Or was it just the males? I only glanced at it.
Depends in the instance. So the first one of them, well, two of the descriptions, both males are tracked. The second instance, meant to be close to a female. It doesn't mention that the female was tracked in the paper that I saw, and off the top of my head, I cannot remember. But the fact that it's discussed in a way that heavily suggesting that they know a female was there makes me think that it was also a tracked female as opposed to just knowing she was present.
Yeah. Because that does seem to be the thing with snakes, that they'll fight, but it does tend to be when there's at least it seems like it tends to be when there's a female around.
Well, I think there's a really convincing argument that it's almost certainly with these king cobras, because two of the individuals, we have 6 and 7 who, here documented having a squabble. But in previous years, outside of breeding season, they were documented in very close proximity to each other, potentially even sharing a shelter site outside of breeding season. Very similar sized males, very sort of heavy home range overlap for most of their time, as far as we can tell. So, yeah, I do really suspect that either fights are rare because there are other ways of coming to an agreement as such, or it's only very specific time of year and needs something else to sort of prompt it.
Yeah. Seeing snake combat remains on the bucket list. Still never seen that. One of my friends saw adders the other day, sent a video, and I was like, cool, fine.
Super envious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well done, Sarish. All right. So, yeah, I think that's about it for this episode, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, unless you've got anything else, but I think that's good. It's all for me.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, so I think all that remains to be said, if you want to get in touch with us, you can, herphighlights@gmail.com. Massive thanks to all our supporters on Patreon. That's patreon.com/herphighlights.
Yes.
If you'd like to contribute a few pennies to the podcast, we'd be very grateful. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's herp_highlights. Same for TikTok. I'm Tom_E_major on Instagram. And I think all that remains to be said is thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.